Mercedes' sweet spot. Mercedes has admitted that they were caught in a predicament with the current set of regulations, but are confident that they have resolved it in preparation for next season's W15 car, and the concern now is whether this solution will come too late for Mercedes in this regulatory cycle, especially since Red Bull appeared to grasp this concept, and Adrian Newey was aware of it from the very beginning. Could this prove to be the real deal and propel Mercedes to compete with Red Bull, or will the Brackley team be proven wrong yet again? The German manufacturer has faced difficulties since the introduction of ground effect cars at the beginning of the 2022 season, as last year's W13 suffered from porpoising and the team struggled with a limited ride height operating window where its car could generate downforce. This limitation essentially forced the car to run close to the ground. This constraint led to two major problems: the risk of bouncing as downforce levels increased, and a necessity for stiff suspension, and this necessity made the car susceptible to issues on bumpy tracks and curbs. For the current year's W14, Mercedes aimed to create downforce across a broader range of ride heights, a goal they believed would be facilitated by the FIA raising the edges of the floors by 15 millimeters. However, it's understood that Mercedes ended up being overly cautious with its ride height approach. Their reluctance to run close to the ground led them to operate at higher ride heights than other teams, leaving untapped performance potential. The changes weren't ever going to completely eradicate bouncing, but rather ease the problem and prevent teams from running the cars in a way that could damage to the drivers in the long term. According to Allison, the change left Mercedes with a clear choice to make over the winter, one that was influenced by the painful memories of 2022, where endlessly chasing bouncing wrecked Mercedes' season and firmly put a stop to its sustained period of success in F1's hybrid era. Although we made great strides last year, 2023 presented all the teams with a rule change that offered some protection against bouncing, he explained. Over the winter, we faced a choice: go aggressive and trade the bouncing protection in the rule change for performance, or take a more cautious route and steer clear of the sort of porpoising that wrecked our season last year. We chose the cautious path, knowing that it would be less painful to correct if we were wrong. The story of our year so far has been mostly about finding out that we had been too cautious and making the changes to correct that. That's a testament to just how haunting the surprise porpoising has been for Mercedes throughout this new era. The issue continues to plague the team, even with its cautious approach, as highlighted at Spa, where George Russell lamented the fact that it was a shame to see that as a sport at the pinnacle of motorsport, the majority of teams are still struggling with bouncing. Mercedes Chief Technical Officer Mike Elliott thinks that the bouncing was probably a result of setup or the circuit itself, rather than a characteristic reintroduced by recent upgrades. However, this is evidence that the problem of porpoising has yet to be fully resolved by Mercedes, despite the caution they exercised over the winter. This approach, which Allison seems to suggest, might have reduced the performance potential of the W14, possibly contributing to the team's inability to challenge the dominant Red Bull. There were high expectations for the significant upgrade package unveiled at the Monaco Grand Prix, but the team remains well behind the RB19, and this was demonstrated by Lewis Hamilton finishing nearly 50 seconds behind Max Verstappen at Spa, even though he started 3 places ahead of him on the grid. So it's clear that 2023 is a lost year for Mercedes, and there are already indications that the team is utilizing this season as a testing ground for 2024. The bodywork packages, such as the one brought to Spa, are more about collecting data for the upcoming W15 than significantly enhancing the performance of the current W14. At this stage of the year, the wind tunnel is heavily focused on 2024, Allison confirmed. Large chunks of the drawing office, vehicle dynamics, manufacturing for long lead time production items are starting to gather their skirts. From the summer break onwards, next year's car is where the largest call is answered. But that also gives opportunities for the W14 too. So what does Mercedes need to change for next year's car? They've clearly made many mistakes, and every time they discuss the current car concept, it seems as though they lack the deep understanding of this set of regulations that they had previously, and Red Bull too has outperformed them in this regard. Mike Elliott stated that they examined various bodywork approaches during the the winter but found none that were better, and they even trialed different concepts in simulator testing, such as experimenting with side pods, but didn't see any benefits. So they decided to stick with the zero pods, only to realize once the season began that this concept didn't have the performance ceiling they needed. They reportedly made substantial gains in the simulator, and while some of these have been seen on track, not all of them have materialized. So the current challenge is to use the airflow around the side pods and the sides of the car to seal off the floor, and to run the car as low to the ground as possible. In theory, this is what makes a ground effect car work, running it as close to the ground as possible to maximize downforce from the floor. But this approach generates problems, as the W13 was fast in the simulator, but on the track it was too low, causing porpoising and losing performance, so this difficulty was hard for the drivers to manage. Much of the debate is around the suspension, which is where Red Bull appears to have a significant advantage. They have set up their suspension from the beginning of these regulations in such a way that greatly benefits them. The anti-dive and anti-squat setup ensures the car is almost always perfectly level at the front and rear, meaning they don't have to run the car as stiff while still maintaining the floor just above the ground to generate a lot of downforce. James Allison elaborated that all teams were aiming for some protection against bouncing over the winter, and that they faced a dilemma, whether to go very aggressive, hoping to fix the porpoising but maximize performance, or take a more cautious approach to avoid the major bouncing issues that the W13 had. Mercedes admits that their mistake was leaning too far towards caution, which resulted in a car that was too conservative, so they are now working to rectify the mistakes made over the winter. However, the words from Mercedes do not necessarily show a strong understanding of the current set of regulations, as they seem to have fallen into a trap of running the car too low, something Red Bull understood from the beginning. It appears that focusing on the suspension situation was more beneficial than having a traditional but stiff suspension and running the car close to the ground, which led to problems. Red Bull has not suffered from these issues and may even be 2 years ahead of Mercedes in some respects, putting them at a disadvantage that they don't want, especially if they hope to catch up by 2026. When regulations change again. Mercedes and Mike Elliott have expressed that they now think they are in the right position for the winter. With limited testing restrictions, especially for top-tier teams, they don't have infinite opportunities for wind tunnel runs, and they must choose a ride height and go for it without testing various levels. They believe they now know what to do, perhaps running the car a bit higher or changing the suspension to make sure it works, but they're far from having it nailed down. Despite talking positively about finding the ride height sweet spot, evidence from Belgium showed that they haven't nailed it with the current set of upgrades. These issues were costly in Belgium, especially when compared to Red Bull, who were once again the fastest car over the weekend. What worries me about Mercedes is that they keep holding on to finding the perfect ride height, but different tracks demand different ride heights. You can make a car that is absolutely unbeatable rocket ship in your perfect ride height window, only to fall flat on its face the second that ride height is disturbed. That's what happened to their zero pod concept as well. We were all talking about the amazing revolutionary potential of the concept if they could get it in the right window. Well, they simply couldn't. The window was too narrow to use. So I feel like the reason Red Bull is so much better than the others is the fact they've developed a car which doesn't need to adhere to one perfect height. They can lower it and gain a little more lap time, but if the track demands a different amount of ground clearance, the car still works brilliantly. There were articles flying around that Mercedes has always had this philosophy of making a car with the highest peak downforce possible and then engineering the problems away. That just hasn't worked with these new cars, it seems. But then again, they are a multiple world championship winning team, so they should be able to figure something out. What do you think? Do you think Mercedes really did find a sweet height spot for their car? Let us know down in the comments below, and we will see you in the next one.